Hi everybody, and season's greetings to you. So welcome back to the workbench, probably for the last time in 2023, and I thought it was high time I addressed something that was missing from my maintenance videos, and that is the maintenance and care of these wonderfully basic little 040s that you get. Plus we've got a Bachmann 060 there with a special story behind it. And we have a Thomas the Tank Engine range from Hornby James, and there's more to come. We're going to look at servicing and maintenance on these Locos because they do need it, despite being fairly robust and a lot of fun. They absolutely do need maintenance as well, but it's quite simple and easy for most people to do. As usual, we'll be using Hornby lubricants, which are plastic safe and designed for model trains. So without further ado, let's crack on. Our first customer then is the Santa Express locomotive, appropriately enough. To undo, you just stick the flat blade screwdriver at the front under the cylinders and aim for the middle and just gently lever up. And as you can see, it unclips, revealing the familiar mechanism that we all know. So we'll set aside the body to keep it safe and concentrate on the mechanism for now. First job with any of these types of locos is to remove any bits of hair and fluff that have built up in and around the gear. The pistons are simple, but you need to clear the slots where they slide in and out and lubricate the area as well. Now these models only have plastic bearings because they're very light, but you can consider putting just a little bit of weight in this space, which most of them seem to have, and which doesn't clash with anything on the inside of the body. You can glue a little bit of weight in there. Now I find a very good source of weight are old car wheel balances, which can be readily clipped up, and I think they're not lead these days because we can't be trusted not to eat it. So they're safe to deal with anyway. But don't put too much in because you'll wear the bearings out, so it's a compromise. This one has a little bit of metal at the front just to give it a bit of extra weight, but I think I probably will add a little bit in there just to improve things. Now when you install your bit of extra weight, just make sure that the coupling hook isn't obstructed because it sits in that space as well. As you can see, I've chosen a little bit of lead and I've put a drop of super glue underneath, and that will be the loco weighing a little bit more traction. So now using Hornby Lube medium oil, we're going to apply a tiny drop at the back of the motor here and a tiny drop at the front, and this is where the brushes are, but because it slopes down it's not too critical. You can put just a small drop there, but you still don't want it tracking back. Then the axles. Now this is very important on these little things. The coupling rod just in the way there, as you can see, they keep flipping up as you work on it. But you can see the axles there, they're going to be easy to oil either side of the worm. Very important because the bearings will wear. Less so on the back axles. They can be very tight to the body sometimes, but I think it looks like I can just get the nozzle of the oil in there and put a drop of oil on those. Then of course there'll be the cranks back and front, then gear lube, Hornby Lube gear oil on the worm, and possibly I'm going to put a little bit of gear lube just inside the cylinders at the front so that the pistons can pump through there and be lubricated as well. It'll also help hold them in place whilst you reassemble. Now everything's lubricated and the body's back on. We're at the point of wheel cleaning, paying particular attention to the close in to the axles, backs of the wheel, where the pickups rub. Can you just see that one at the front particularly is showing up? The back ones are the same, both sides obviously, so you need to make sure they're clear, and also very carefully pass something thin across just to scrape where the pickup rubs without bending it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. So just using the two power clips and as you can see it's all running nice and smooth. And I'll just use a cotton bud now soaked with a bit of IPA on the treads and the backs of those wheels. Just as a surprise fact, I've just done the backs of the wheels and look at the muck that I got off. Well worth doing. You really need to push that down towards the middle to get near the axle to get where the pickup rubs. And there we have the Santa Express, nice and smooth. So these 4 engines will all be very similar, and in fact this one and that one don't even have the pistons to worry about. And they may be different ways round, they just put them in any old way round. So the gear is at the front on that one. I don't know if it is on this one. Yep, it's at the front. It's going to be at the front of all of these, isn't it? But there are some, like the 06, where the gear is the other way around, with the mechanism the other way around. Right, so you've seen me do this one. I'm going to crack on and do the others, and if there's any differences I'll let you know, but I don't expect there will be. Of course, I should just mention that the rolling stock that comes with these little engines is also well worth maintaining. Cleaning wheels and bearings, so that they're as easy to pull as possible, so that the limited traction power on these little locos isn't unnecessarily strained. I'm sure you know how to do that, so I won't bother telling you. That's what I'm doing next. Straight away I found one with a difference, and that is that this is a screw that secures the front of the blue engine in place. So you need to remove that screw, which I've loosened it off ready for these things, ready to show you. And at the back of the loco there is a lug which engages, and then you can lift it forward to get it out. Very hard to do with one hand. What I wanted to point out with reassembly is that these springs, which are part of the motor mount, need to be squeezed in slightly to clear the body before you can push it down in. So you just squeeze them in with your fingers and push down in. I can't do it as I've only got one hand. And then it should slide down and you'll be able to put the securing screw back in, and that loco will be done. So this little engine was actually found in a skip. Poor little thing. Nothing wrong with it. We're just going to give him a good service, which he deserves. And this one again is one where you have a screw at the front to release first and the clip at the back. So let's get him open. As you can see, this one is actually an older loco because it's just got the one capacitor. The EMC rules had changed for the later ones and they got the 2. The weight I provided by just adding some rolled up old solder that's no use anymore. It's just got the wrong resin in it. Otherwise she's standard, so very quick and easy to service. Of interest in this loco is that there is a weight in the front that sits around the body securing pin, so that has to be on the right way around. It is offset, they're not straight in the middle, so just make sure that you get that in the right place. It's just to keep, add a little bit of weight and to keep it located. So that's 4 of those types done. Bit slow, Santa Claus, but the others happily push him along. See you later, guys. Now Digby here, a little simple Bachmann red engine, which was one of their DCC set locos, was sent quite surprisingly after a certain bad event that occurred in my life, and she turned up, and we can't for the life of us know where from, but nonetheless welcome. However, she is a pig to get at the motor. Now I did that a while ago, the motor. So all I'm going to do is remove the bottom plate now, check the pickups, because they, as you can probably see, they are not touching the backs of the wheels, and give it a clean and a lube as we can do. The DCC part was removed by me some time ago. So as you can see, when you take the bottom plate off, it's hardwired at the back, which is a pain, but you can see the gear train there going up to the motor, and doesn't look too bad. There's not too much to do there. There's also a little bit of oil in the wheel axle bearings, so that's good as well. It's a metal chassis, as you can see. So not too much to do there other than clean the pickups and reshape them so that they make good contact. So that's him serviced. You can actually see, despite the simplicity of it, he's a very good little runner. Another one done. Another red engine to follow. Now then, James, the red engine from the Thomas the Tank Engine range is a tender drive loco. So we'll deal with it in the two halves that there are. First of all, we'll be making sure that the pickups are good, because they do go through the back and the standard old-fashioned transfer method. And that is, everything is as free running as possible. Let's go. So with this part, there is no need for disassembly at all, because everything's nice and easily accessible. We can get lubricant on the axles there and there, and because these move a fair bit, we can get down the side there. There's your pickups, so they just need a clean through, probably scrape with a scalpel or something thin, and then just a general clean round, and that will be that. Oh, apart from the pony truck, mustn't forget that. So James has had his bit of maintenance, and as you can see, perfectly free running. I noticed underneath there's like a branding for Thomas the Tank. Does that say 2004? That's obviously when he was designed or made. So now let's come on to the tender. Now, like a lot of these Hornby tender mechanisms, they unclip from the back. You just slide your fingernail underneath, and there we are, revealing the motor. So pretty much a standard thing really. You can see where the lubricant's going to be needed. Quite a bit of old stuff on there. In behind the drive cog from the motor there, on the two springs that hold the cogs in places, the pinions, and a tiny little fraction there, which is the other end of the motor, which I think is a plastic bearing, so it definitely needs it, but not too much, because the brushes are just underneath there. And that will be that done. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll see how it runs soon. As the mechanism running now, it's been lubricated. See, I'm feeding it where the tender plugs into the loco to get the feed. That all sounds pretty good. So the clip's onto the pin, and the other side of the wheels there, ready for wheel contact cleaning. We've got traction tyres, so they'll obviously have to be cleaned as well, using all the PA. You wouldn't use lighter fuel on them because it could attack the neoprene rubber. But anyway, let's clean her up. So during cleaning, I noticed that one of the traction tyres, which was on that wheel, is completely rotten. It's brittle and just falls apart. So I have a spare here, which easy enough to slot on. You don't need to take it apart, you can just push it down the other side, and that will do it. But before you do, make sure you thoroughly clean the inside face where it's going to sit, so that it won't slip if any grease has got in there. And you can see what I mean. I've just cleaned out the channel, and that was a clean cotton bud when I started. So now it's ready to take the new traction tyre. And so after a little struggle with the traction tyre, James is once again ready to ride the rails. And so where James goes, his nicely maintained coaches are bound to follow. Now the Bachmann Jupiter locomotive is interesting because the motor is in the tender and it transfers its drive via a rod to the loco. All the pickup is on the tender, so all we need to do for maintenance is to oil the gears, which is a worm and pinion, and the coupling cranks, slide bars and pony, and then our main work will be on the motor. As you can hear, it's running a little bit rough. 2 screws are removed from there, and the tender should open, revealing the motor. And there is the result. Quite a substantial motor and quite serviceable. We can get at the commutator and the 2 pinions, no problem at all, which I will now do. Tiny drop of oil front there, very tiny at the back because it's where the brushes are. And then that's pretty much it. As I said, the pickup all comes from the tender, and what you have is insulation bushes on that side and then on that side, so we pick up there and there with these brushes rubbing on the axles. So obviously those are areas that need to be cleaned. And there is the very fun Jupiter. This is a Hornby Emily J83, one of the more simple models again. It's not running too bad. So I think we'll have a basic check over and see how it is. To gain access, we need to remove the rear coupling. And then it's simply a case of inserting a flat blade screwdriver here to disengage the clip. The screwdriver is inserted here, not actually straight down as shown in the instructions, but down the side there, just to relieve the clip on the inside. Once you've got it done, it's easy enough to pop the chassis out. Inside is one of the small motors that Hornby is well known for. We can put a little drop of oil on the back bearing there, but the rest of it is fairly hidden unless you're prepared to remove this screw and lift it out. But that is going to disengage all the pickups as well, because these inductors, which are part of the TV noise suppression, are tightly held to the chassis. Now interestingly, the brushes are up at this end, so it should be possible just in there to get a very fine oiler in to put a drop of oil at that bearing, and then it will just be a case of adding some gear grease to the main pinion, which I'm sure has just run off the worm there. So not really a great deal to do inside. As you can see, the pickups are actually on the inside, so with the body off, it's a good opportunity just to pass something thin between the pickups to make sure there's no fluff build up. Having replaced the body, it is now time for gear lube and simple wheel cleaning. Don't forget to oil the coupling rod cranks on both sides. And now our J83 is nice and smooth. Another one done. This would also go for the Thomas tank engine that you'll see later. Guys, it's time to service Toby the tram. That's another type of mechanism. Alright, so the face is this end, so he's facing to the left, and you'll need to remove the screw in there and this coupling. And then if I go in close, you can see here 2 clips that are clipped to this metal part. You need to stick the old screwdriver between there and just lever them out. Contrary to the instructions, you do not need to remove any screws or couplings at this end, just here. So So once those clips have been released, the mechanism comes out like that, and that's what it looks like. So we've got the standard type of motor that Hornby fit in these. We can put a drop of oil at that end of the spindle, being careful because it's the brushes, so we only want a tiny little bit. And if we undo these screws, we'll be able to lift that plate off and put a drop of oil on that end of the motor. Then it will just be some grease onto the worm and the pinion below it. You can see the two cogs there, so we'll just grease that area lightly, and that should be that one ready for going. So there we go, I've removed the motor front retaining plate, and you can indeed get access to the motor bearing. So I'll lube it all up, and then we'll have a look at what else needs to be done on this little loco. This is interesting. So when you do the screws up on this front plate, don't clamp them down really tightly, back them off just a little bit, otherwise it tends to pull the worm down too hard onto the pinion below it, because at this end it's not so well retained. So I think they call it finger tight, but you may need to experiment with backing it off a little bit. You can see how tight it is in there. So that's how loose mine is at the moment. I'm tempted just to put a tiny bit more turn on it without it clamping down on the worm. There we go, that's got rid of that. Let's put him up on the test track and just make sure that he runs okay before we press on. Yep, seems okay. Right, so lubricate the axles. You have to be careful of the pickups, the axle bearings, and then clean with your cotton bud the backs of the wheels for the pickups and the treads, of course. And don't forget to lubricate the coupling rod cranks as usual. Let's see what she's like. There we go, Toby the Tram from Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. Smooth as silk. Good little mechanism actually. Can even do the all so important crawl look. Anyway, on to the next one. Simple as before, it's just much like the other 040s. Okay, Hornby 06 shunter. As you can see, it's a steam chassis. The unused cylinders, they go towards the back, and it is an entirely clip-in chassis. So I've done the oiling and clean up on there, and we've just got to clean the wheels. Now, very much the star of these Back to Basics locos, Thomas the Tank Engine from Hornby. I'm expecting the mechanism to be very much the same as the J83, but we'll just take a look. So yes, very much the same. Remove the coupling, rear coupling, and then use a screwdriver to release the clip, and the mechanism will come out. And there it is. Almost identical, isn't it? So we'll have a good look at that and see what needs to be done. So I decided to take the screw out of the motor block because it was bad inside. You can see the grease has gone hard, but disappointing black gunk that holds it down at the back. At least now you can get to the pickups to clean. So we'll give it a service and a clean, and then hopefully get it back together in one piece. Okay, wasn't quite as simple. The back of the motor has lugs either side that go up under the chassis there, and the front had a brass washer under that screw. However, the metal underneath is extremely soft and had pulled through, so in order to get the screw to bite I had to take away the brass washer because I could then get the screw down further. But nonetheless, it's all back in place, and it wasn't too hard to deal with the pickups either. Get the back in first and then spring those in as you push that down. Anyway, good job done, but a little bit more complicated than I'd like. And there he is, all nice and smooth and cleaned. So it's definitely well worth taking the time to service these little locomotives. Depending on use, perhaps once a year, because the lubricant does dry out, depending on the type you use. But there we go, Thomas is now ready for his Christmas fun. Simple little Jinty, slightly different to get inside. You have to push a screwdriver into that lug and push down slightly to disengage the clip and allow you to pull the chassis out. Now, while essentially the same, these and the Caledonian Pug and the Smoky Joe are a step up because they have a metal chassis there, which gives them a great deal more weight, and they're a little bit more quality build. So we're going to see how we get into this one to give it a service. So it's easy. It's the one with the screw at the front of the loco, which should allow you to tilt up the rest of the chassis. So we have it open. The body has actually got weights in either end as well. Chassis is pretty much what we were expecting, I think. Yeah. So the metal is actually all on the body. This running plate is the metal. That's what gives it the weight. Otherwise, this is just the standard plastic chassis. Next up, the Thomas the Tank Engine range diesel. Obviously a Hymek. I'm expecting this to be one where you just pop the bogies out of the chassis using a screwdriver. Let's have a look. And indeed that's the case. You're just going to slide a screwdriver down the back there and it will prise out. Mechanism revealed. Turn it over and we can see the cogs, which are all very dry, so it does need a lube and a bit of a clean. Now, to avoid having to open the motor completely to clean the commutator, this hole is provided. So if you soak your cotton bud with the IPA and twist, you'll see it turns the commutator as well and brings off a good amount of muck if it's built up in there. You do need lube on this. I'm going to recommend the gear grease and a very small amount because it is just a plastic bearing, so it needs a bit of protection, but you don't want it going onto the brushes. And now we're looking at the gears. Small drop of oil on the back of the armature there behind the cog. There won't be any need for it here because it's already greasy. And then just down the backs on the spindles where the cogs rotate, a little drop of oil there, and then a bit of gear grease on the actual gears, and that'll be her done. Okay, it was a little bit more complex. If you do find that it won't go and that nudging it and shifting the motor by hand will make it suddenly start and then it stops again, you will need to remove the brush holders to clean the brushes and contacts. These screws are held in with the paint, so it's rather difficult, so you need a really good screwdriver to fit them, and then they'll come out as one piece, and the springs are sitting just behind there, behind those dimples, sitting on top of the brushes, which you can then tap out. You can then clean everything, including the brushes. I've just done that. It's been an absolute nightmare to get this back in, but it's okay now. And after much ado, we have the diesel working again. And nice and smooth. So for Emily, which does have a painted cablet, quite good, is that screw at the back to remove, and then the chassis should tilt forward. Now once we get it open, we find that despite what the instructions say, there's only a 3-pole motor, but it runs pretty good anyway. Very similar to the J83 for layout. We'll see what we can lubricate. Well, this is one of those cases where discretion is about a part of valour. To get to the gears would mean removing the bottom plate or taking off the DCC blanking socket and undoing the screws and pivoting the motor out. Both complex, both risk upsetting things. As this Loco runs pretty smoothly anyway, I think it's fairly new, I'm not going to do it. I've oiled the wheel bearings and I should obviously give it a good clean, but I'm going to leave it untouched otherwise. Well, unfortunately, due to a defective pickup arm wiper, I did have to take the bottom plate off, and as you can see it is removed, and it's actually quite nice. It's got proper bearings and everything, and a nice little PCB for the pickups, so I can now lubricate everything that needs to be done and hopefully fix this pickup arm. And the first tender that we've dealt with, guys, old tech this one. It's like how Triang had it, was split mushroom wheels mounted on an axle that goes right the way through, and the wheels just turn on that axle. There's no actual bearing. Yeah. Anyway, a bit of an oil in the middle so that it should track through, and cleaning the wheels, and that's that done. And so there is the rather handsome Emily done. A lovely Dean single, of course. Now we have the big boy of the Thomas the Tank Engine range with Gordon himself. And yeah, I was just seeing if he was running. Oh, he's running. Tender drive. Ooh, surprisingly silky smooth. Might not need too much. A little bit of oil on the crank pins and slide gear and that to make sure he's free running. And just check at the tender. Let's have a look and see what we find. So, it's rather nice actually. All this valve gear works. There's no fake bits. There are flanges on this, rather than Hornby's Posh Pacifics where they have the silly floating in mid-air wheels. And the tender drive, well, what do we drive on? Drive on the two outer sets. So I've oiled all the valve gear and crank pins, slide bars, cylinders, and the front wheels and the axles, because we want this as free running as possible, because any drag on the engine is extra load for the tender to actually do the driving. I'm just going to check the tender to check on the status of the lubrication on its gears. So I decided not to do anything to the tender other than clean it, because it runs so sweetly already. Really well made. So there is Gordon. Have to be a future video before we go inside his tender, which is just a lift off thing I think. But there's nothing to do there at the moment because it's nice and smooth. And next on the bench is Edward. A 440 again tender drive, and again sounding silky, so it should just be a clean and general lubricate. Okay, so I've noticed that the pickup is on the wrong side of the wheel. It's bent over there, so I've removed the three screws from the base plate, and I hope that will allow me to lift it up and correct that problem. Well, sadly those screws don't allow you to get to underneath the base plate, because what they are is the chassis of the tender is one piece. They actually hold the mechanism inside, so I'm going to have to pop the tender lid off and see how we get on. Well, surprising inside, we've got like a motor bogie and a DCC socket, so that is most surprising. But there's the defective pickup, so I should be able to fix that from this side at least. All back together. Edward is ready. Quite a handsome engine, isn't it? Goes nice. Okay, the Railroad 08. There's two clips at the back. It's actually easier to slide a screwdriver down onto them and push them out than it is to release the one at the front. So that's what I've done to get the mechanism out. And as you see, it's still quite determined to stay in place at the front there. Once we get inside, we have the standard mechanism that we're all fairly familiar with. Although I do notice we've got pickups on the middle wheel now. There's no traction tyres on this model, which is great. So easy bit of servicing to do now. And that is the 08 shunter done. Rather a difficult service actually, due to the weird clips and things inside.